Well, welcome everyone to today's Fireside Chat with Silicon Valley Forum, and the official title is Perfect Pitch. Our guest today is Patricia Liu, and she is a pitch deck specialist and angel investor. I've got a few announcements here before we get into the conversation. The Silicon Valley Forum is a California-based 501c3 nonprofit organization. Our mission is to foster innovation, entrepreneurship, and leadership in Silicon Valley and throughout the world. We achieve our mission through events, programs, and conferences. And the aim for the Silicon Valley Forum is to function as a center of knowledge and connections. We cover everything from the latest tech trends to the startup and investment ecosystem. And our activities are aimed to educate, train, inspire, and connect technologists, entrepreneurs, corporates, and investors. We do have a few events coming up next week. We've got a fireside chat of building an AI-powered fashion community. That will be with Shania Tsai. Shania is originally from Taiwan. She lives now in New York City. And I've known her for several years when she launched her app, a company called Hanger. So that'll be next week. On Saturday, the January 25th, will be an online event called Industrial Africa 2025. There'll be 4 sessions. This is a focus on IoT, or Internet of Things, and connected devices in that market in sub-Saharan Africa. And again, that'll be online. Here in Silicon Valley and the San Francisco Bay Area, we've got an in-person event, the February Coastal Habitat Restoration Day. That's at the El Viso Marina County Park. It's part of the Santa Clara County Park System. And that is for those who are unfamiliar, that is the southern tip of the San Francisco Bay. And so we'll be gathering in person there to do some environmental work. So we're not just about online forums, but we engage with the community. And all the way in April is the 18th annual Star Tides Capabilities Demonstration in Arlington, Virginia. Some of you know that I am the chair of the Star Tides Advisory Board. This is a 2-day event on the campus of George Mason University, where we bring together companies from members of the private sector, academia, NGO, and government, focusing on sustainability and resilience. And then we will after 2 days, at George Mason University, we will then go to the Tides follow-on event inside the Pentagon Center courtyard at the Pentagon. And those are some of our events. To make the lawyers happy, we've got the following disclaimer. The Silicon Valley Forum, the California Public Benefit Corporation, does not endorse or sponsor any commercial product, service, or activity. SVF's production of this event does not constitute endorsement by SVF or its representatives. All SVF's programs and services are extended to the public on a non-discriminatory basis. And we thank you for your support. We are a 501c3, and we do get support from the public, and thank you for that. All right, I will stop sharing, and we will go into our conversation with Patricia. It's interesting because Patricia and I met not that long ago, I think less than a year ago, at a Investors Network event in San Francisco. And we were asked, I actually like the format, is to introduce the person to your left, I think it was. So as Patricia was to my right, we're getting to know each other. And she told me that she is a pitch deck specialist and coach. And those who know me know that I'm not a fan of pitch decks. And so, I directly voiced my opinion. I think Patricia took it in stride. But I have followed Patricia through LinkedIn Got to know her at other events. And the reality is, most investors want a pitch deck, and most founders have a pitch deck. Um, and I followed Patricia's work, and it's very valuable. I do see, I'm an investor judge at a lot of events. I'm a investor myself. I see a lot of pitch decks, and candidly, a lot of them are lacking the information that I think the average investor is looking for. So I think today's conversation, we're going to cover a number of different key points. But Patricia, welcome. We'll let you kind of give us a brief background of what you're doing now. But as you do that, let me pose the first question to you, and I'm going to drop your, if it's okay with you, I'm going to drop your LinkedIn profile into the chat, and
yes, please.
That way people can reach out to you through LinkedIn because you are active on it. But the question is, let's go from the founder's perspective. When they create a pitch deck, what is some of the key missing elements that they have when you do the initial review, when you start the coaching process? What's the initial key? What are they missing? And also, what is it that they're doing right off the bat? So I'll leave that to you.
Okay. Thank you, Aaron, for having me here. I'm very excited to talk about one of my favorite topics, which are pitch decks. So in terms of what I see happen most often with pitch decks are that founders are thinking about what they want to tell the investors in the audience rather than really thinking about what the audience or investor would want to know. And I think it sounds similar, but it's really not, because founders often want to talk about the product or their solution or their research, right? But it's much more than that, because it's about a pitch is really about talking about all aspects of the company. It is about your solution product, but it's also about your all aspects of the company to show your potential as a very good investment. And I think that a lot of times I see even very, very detailed decks that are missing very common things like the business model. How are you going to make money, right? Because if it's not clear how you're going to make money, it's not clear how the investor will get a good return on their investment. So different things like that. And the other thing I see is that a lot of founders just follow a template or they use an AI tool and they're not really thinking about, does it really fit with their company? So some recent pitches I had heard were they use the typical template, or they found a template and they followed it. But there's some things that they should have talked about right off the bat. For example, one company already had 8 million downloads of their app. Yes, they weren't making money yet. They were still very early stage, but they left it towards the very end because they thought, well, we don't really have revenue, but they had millions of downloads already, starting with that. Or they had a very famous, well-known investor, and they left it on the team slide, which was on the very towards the end, or things like that. So not really thinking through what really works for your company at this stage of the company. So I think from the founder perspective, that they're not really thinking about what would an investor want to know and what do they need to know at what level. And the other thing I want to say is that I tend to think in more principles and not tools, right? And what is the ultimate goal of a pitch deck is really to convey what is your startup about in a way that investors can easily and quickly understand. So however you get there will be different for every company, and you have to, that's where some of the creativity comes in, to thinking about how do I get that across, how do I get someone, investors, attention and keep it, right? So it's more than a formula or a template or something like that. It's really thinking at a much more fundamental level about, okay, what are the things that are very impressive or attention grabbing about my company, and starting from there. Uh, the other thing I would say is that people, founders often don't think about the basic presentation principles, right? So people remember a lot more from the beginning of a presentation than the middle or the end, and they're spending that valuable time in the beginning talking about the problem, or worse yet, they're spending the beginning part of a pitch spending so much time introducing their team. That's not what you need to introduce your team, unless it's obvious what your solution is, or even or talking about their own biography or story of how they got to this point. If that is the most valuable part of your company, yes, by all means talk about that, but a lot of times it's not. And I was, in preparation for today's conversation, I reread your blog post about no, I don't want to see your pitch deck. And I think we, at the end of the day, you and I are coming at it from a very similar perspective, in that we want to know about the company. And I really liken the pitching and the pitch deck similar to a job interview and a resume, right? So the pitch deck is similar to your resume. You're looking at, yes, all of the things on the resume, but you're looking at all the other things on that resume that are hidden data points to who that person is. And that interview is where you're making that connection with the founder to figure out who are they really. And it's not just what they say, but it's how they say it, and it's all the other actions or lack of action that is forming your judgment about whether this company is viable.
I'm glad you use the analogy as the interview. I completely agree with you. As an employer myself, I tell people, the interview may be scheduled for 30 minutes or even an hour, but I know, and most employers and hiring managers know within 5 minutes whether this candidate is going to be the right fit. And for the rest of the meeting, I'm thinking, all right, how am I going to fit this person into the team, and how do we get started right away and doing that. And then there's the other side where the candidate is not sure, I'm questioning, did I miss something? That's true with the investment. I think most investors pretty much have their mind made up very quickly, and then they're now, while they're half focused on the rest of the conversation and the pitch, but they're also thinking, how can I help this company? What's going to be my role? How else can I, what other investors do they need? What strategic partners do they need? What is it I can bring to the team other than just, money? And so I'm very, very happy you mentioned that. Let me pose a question, and you covered, there's a lot of overlap of what you just said. Now, let me pose the question from the investor's perspective. I think what prompted me about that blog post, no, I don't want to see your pitch deck, is because when I wrote that several years ago, I see a lot of pitches that are more about what I call product pitches versus investment pitches. And so I just realized, I just got tired. I got frustrated. I got tired of it. And I just said, well, this is the agenda. This is what I want to do. And so CES was last week, and there was a Silicon Valley Summit that was on the day preceding CES. A lot of pitches. We had throughout CES. Then there was a JP Morgan, and Zahava Stroud on Monday had an event. Max Shapiro had an event on Tuesday, and at 3 o'clock Pacific time, Max Shapiro was having an online event that I'm an investor judge for 2 hours. And I say this because we're still exposed to a lot of pitches that are more product pitch. So the question to you, Patricia, what is it that you think you're an investor? You're yourself. You're surrounded by investors. What is it that you think the investors are looking for that the founders may not be aware of, and they need to be aware of it to as they put together a solid pitch deck?
Yes. So I would say one of the biggest things that it sounds very common sense, but I can't tell you how often it doesn't happen, is investors need to very, very comfortably and understand what is the solution and the business model at a minimum, right? And sometimes I'll hear pitches for 10 minutes and I'm at an MIT Angels meeting and we're discussing it in our closed discussion. And even after 10 minutes of pitch and 10 minutes of Q&A, we're still not clear what is the product and what is the business model? How are they going to make money? And if those two questions are not clear, that's a lot of red flags, right? Because it means a number of things. It means that they can't communicate clearly, right? So that means what is their capacity or ability to do work on the business and talk to people, and what in addition to the more fundamental question, what exactly is the product and the business model, how you're going to make money. So that's one. And two is I see that in going back to what I talk about a lot of times is considering the audience, which means so many things. It's like really thinking from the audience perspective. What would they want to know? What would they want to see? Some things I see, two examples are, say, the market size slides, right? And we all see the TAM Samsung. And I really compare that to, say, you're doing a interview for McKinsey and they ask you about the case studies, right? And they say, how many food delivery drivers are there in New York City? If you directly gave that answer, that number, you'd fail, because it's not about the number. It's not just about the number. They want to know what you're thinking, what you're assuming, how you're mapping out that solution, because it is a test of how you think. And so that's one thing. It's like people are missing the point about all of these slides. It's really about demonstrating your potential of you, your team, and your venture. And that potential is really about what you know, what you've done, and what you can do. Right. And then so that's one. And then the other is about saying very trite things. How often do we see the competitive landscape slide? And they talk about, they have the power grid or the magic quadrant. And I always ask my students, how many pitch decks have you seen where the company says they're second best? You don't. So then what is the point of that slide? Because every company is saying they're the best. And if these are true competitors and they're still in business, they got to be good at something. So as an investor, that's what I'm thinking about. And as investors in those closed discussions, we're not talking about the competitive landscape. We're talking about the barrier to entry in that moat, right? Because that's a more interesting discussion. What is preventing the bigger competitor from throwing money at it and developing a better solution in a shorter amount of time? So that's a more interesting discussion. And when I see pitch decks that just do the typical competitive landscape and the market size slides, I'll often ask, why did you include that? Or what is your perspective on this? And that's my gauge for whether they're really thinking at the right level or they're just putting something in. I've seen slides where they have a go-to-market slide, and whether it's like, okay, we'll advertise through social media and we'll go through friends and family. I know that they're not thinking at the right level. Or another deck I saw, the go-to-market slide was so generic, and they said, oh yeah, we just copied it from some Google search, and because we have to have it. And that tells me that founders are not thinking at the right level from the business perspective, and that's a red flag for me as an investor.
Great information. Let's go into a little bit of your background and how you got from point A to point B. Now, your LinkedIn profile, you've got a bachelor's degree in computer science from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, and you've got a master's of engineering. But you also have some very interesting experiences in the restaurant business. And so, tell us about, where are you from? Where did you grow up? And how did you start your professional career, your academic career, and looking at the past of what led you to today?
Okay. I like to joke that I was MIT. I was made in Taiwan. So I was born in Taiwan and moved here when I was 5. I grew up in Texas and went to MIT for in bachelor's and master's in computer science. I decided to go the consulting route because I really liked having that variety of work. So I was at Accenture in consulting for 10 years. I was a senior manager there. And in thinking about that next promotion to senior executive, I said, well, I'm not quite sure that that's the route I want to take. And let me take some time off and go to culinary school. And because I've always loved cooking. And so I thought, well, if I was around cooking 24/7, I'd get sick of it, but it actually did not happen. And so I went through culinary school, and then the first kitchen I got into out of culinary school was at the French Laundry in Napa Valley. And I worked in different Michelin star restaurants for several years, and then also went back to working for Thomas Keller in the test kitchen as a special projects manager for the restaurant group, basically not just from a culinary perspective, but also helping him open restaurants and doing a lot of different special projects, whatever thing that came about that needed figuring out, essentially. And then now I teach about pitch decks. And people say that there's such different careers. How did you change careers like that? And I thought about it. It's really all the same skills at the end of the day. So considering from Accenture, considering the client, to fine dining where it's considering the guest, and then now in pitch decks, considering the audience or considering the investor, and thinking intentionally and paying attention to details. These are all the same skills. And so this is something that I really try to convey to people, is that you have a unique set of skills and experiences and then so this is what makes you unique as a founder for your company, and this is the same skills and experiences you can apply towards your pitch decks. And I do want to preface all of this by saying that if you ask 10 successful founders and investors how to approach pitching, you'll get at least 8 different answers. So it's really important for founders to take in and look at the different opinions and then figure out what resonates with them and what makes sense to them. Don't just blindly follow advice and not really understand why or what the fundamental reason is for doing that, and seeing whether that makes sense for you.
I'm chuckling because I come up with a different number. You ask 10 different investors for their opinions, and you're going to get 13 opinions.
Yes, I'm trying to be nice.
Right. So yes, but fascinating. Mark in the question talks about the competitive moat, and again, I spent 2 days ago on Tuesday in downtown San Francisco at a pitch event, and there must have been 40 pitches, I think, at least 40. It was a long day, and all on the healthcare space generally, life science, med tech, biotech. And often the investors had asked about the competitive moat. Now, the question is, you've got a patent, so that's one way. You've got trade secrets, right? There's the intellectual property, right? There's the IP that's competitive. But with open source, with other areas, it is a question mark. It is, it's a question. Let me see if I could phrase the question. It's a common question from investors on the competitive moat. What protects you from your competitors? But the question has changed. I've been doing this for a long time, and I know you have as well. The question has changed, particularly in the last, 5-10 years. So that's the question to you. What advice do you give on how you define competitive moat, but how do you send that as a message to the investor?
I would say of course, it differs for every company, every industry, that kind of thing. And I would turn it back to the founder, right? What prompted you to give up all the other opportunities in working for a company and going the more traditional professional route and decide to do a company? What research did you do? And what is it that you decided, like, how did you decide that this was a worthwhile endeavor, right? So, and then thinking about how do you convey that in a way that investors resonate with, whether it is your technology or your product or your team or whatever that is, because sometimes that moat and that advantage, it doesn't necessarily need to be a technology or product based one. It could be your network, or it could be you already have millions of followers, or whatever that is, right? It's no different from the resume where you're thinking about how do I always want to lead with the impressive or the interesting thing to make me stand out. And that's what it is. I don't have just that it's thinking in principles and knowing that ultimate goal is to get the investors to understand why you're doing this and then the potential, right? So it's really digging deep and looking at that. And I want to say that people look at the pitch deck as very separate from their startup, and sadly a lot of times founders view it as a low priority item. And it's so funny because I hear founders tell me fundraising is their top priority. In that same sentence they say that's why I need to throw together a deck. And those are not, that's those don't align, right? The process of creating a pitch deck, and this is why I feel so strongly about this topic, is because the process of creating that deck is you're going to learn so much more about your company. What is really at the core of your solution or your problem that you're trying to solve, or your business model, because you are distilling everything about your business and your venture into just a handful of slides or a few talking points. So you need to be able to really distill it down. What is that core, right? And I think this is actually why a lot of founders procrastinate on working on the pitch deck, not because they just view it as low priority, because these are really tough questions. Because how do you explain it to someone else to then, buy into your what you're trying to do? And this is really hard. It takes a lot of iterations. You think that, just in the same way that poetry is much harder than writing novels, right? Because you're distilling down all of those ideas and words into just a few that convey so much more.
Great points. Mark and Lucy, you're posing questions. If anyone wants to actually, ask the question directly, raise your hand and do so. Mark, are you there? Did you want to expand your question?
Yeah, I'm here. And thanks, Patricia, and thanks, Aaron. So I've seen both ways. So, I've talked to people and potential investors that are very concerned about protecting IP. And then I've actually had other ones that tell me it's not that important to us. It's all about velocity. And I actually think there's something probably in between both of those. It's the reality. But what I found was if you really look at most of the things that people are working on today, there's not much true net new innovation. Everything's iterative. So everything's being built off of something else, which makes it really hard to protect. So as I get people going, okay, what I'm working on is a problem. You ask why I left. It's a problem. I'm in B2B tech sales, massive companies, and there's a problem sitting inside every one of these companies that they all know about. And it's drove me insane enough that I said, I'm going to go fix this because it's so obvious how to fix it. But at the same time, it's so common and so obvious, it's going to be hard to protect it. So when I get those questions, they go, well, you're not going to have trouble protecting that. Ultimately, everybody should be doing it already anyway. So I've only got so much of a window. And that's where I was trying to figure out, how do I address that in a deck? And then Aaron, you actually said something we first started. I hope you touch on at some point in this talk. You don't like pitch decks. So I'm really curious what you would rather have somebody do other than give you a pitch deck to try to get you to invest. Maybe that's something you can take later, but that's kind of the context of why I asked.
I'll let Patricia expand the response. Go ahead, Patricia.
I think in that situation that you're talking about, Mark, yeah, it's going to be hard. Why it might, and maybe you don't need to answer it right now, but think about, you said you started the company because you saw the problem, but what aspect or what were the factors that made you decide this was a viable venture company with the future, and really thinking about what were your plans for creating that barrier to entry, or what did you determine was that barrier to entry? The second is around, Aaron doesn't want to see pitch decks, and I completely understand, because I view the pitch deck as that introduction, right? The resume to get you the invitation to pitch. But at the end of the day, that pitching, that knowing who the founder is and getting a feel for them and making that connection is really important. And so I think Aaron and I are coming from the same place. I'm just saying that the pitch deck is kind of the preview, or the before you get that opportunity to actually sit down with someone. And at the end of the day, it is about getting a feel for that person, because otherwise we would have job interviews that didn't require any human interaction or communications, right? So that's a very important part.
Okay, that makes sense. So what I'm hearing you say is you're really a proponent of the pitch deck being part of the vetting process, and then it switches into where Aaron likes to really dig into the business on the back end of it. Okay, yeah. That makes sense. And then as far as why I did it and where the impact is so massive. I mean, if you're talking billion-dollar companies, it's literally hundreds of millions of dollars at risk that everybody's just living with, and that was why I did it. So part of me is a little bit of Don Quixote in me, and it's so obvious. Everybody loves to be a problem solver. I'm more of a problem finder, and I couldn't believe everybody's living with this thing. And it's as simple as, in a B2B world, if you have a field organization that you're literally betting your company on to go and create trusted relationships to sell, and if you don't have an efficient way to communicate and pull back what they're seeing in the field, you are literally leaving money on the table, and every single company has that problem.
And with that, if maybe the pie is big enough for a lot of people, and for some reason while you were talking about this, I'm not going to mention post-it notes because that's a different kind of discussion, but for some reason I was thinking about paper clips, right? Who first invented paper clips, and how many companies now manufacture that, and why isn't there only one company manufacturing that? I mean, this is something so simple. So it's, I don't have a direct answer for you. And for this type of thing, you will always have those. But even with restaurants, it's like, why is there McDonald's and Burger King, right?
Yeah.
There's big enough of a pie for a lot of different restaurants. So, it's thinking about, okay, so thinking about what your narrative, your messaging is around there, and making the right analogies to show that, yes, there is still opportunity.
Let me. I'm going to put in the link since it's been mentioned, and the aforementioned blog post. For me, it's a couple of things. One, I I'm about sales and marketing. I'm about sales. You're trying to sell a resume. You're selling a business plan. If you go to a customer, I've invested in some amazing innovation where those investments crash and burn. Those companies crash and burn because their inability to sell. And if you go, to do a sales call, you're not going in with a PowerPoint. It's a conversation. It's a conversation with the buyer. And so to me, it's the same thing. I've seen so many pitches where they're just reading from the pitch deck, and that doesn't do it for me. I like a conversation, and also I come from a more of a traditional, I guess, business background of I've been doing this for a long time and over 30 years, and some of the commonalities of companies and investments that are underperformed or failed completely. One is the inability to understand their finances. I strongly believe if you don't know your numbers, you don't know your business. And that doesn't really get conveyed in the pitch deck in my world. So I did that blog post because I know exactly what I'm looking for. I know those first few questions. Wow factor number one, because I'm not a technologist. Most people on this call are a lot smarter than I am. My education background is in classical philosophy. So, but I understand the business of technology. And so what I want is, why is a customer, what's the problem are you solving? Who are you solving it for? And why is a customer willing to pay for it? And then why is an investor willing to invest in this? What's the wow factor number two for the investor? The other aspect is, and this goes to a question to you, Patricia, and then I want to then we'll circle back to what Lucy put in there. But the risk factors. When a company, when a closed corp or privately held corporation is preparing for an IPO, they file a registration statement with the SEC, generally an S1 or an S2. And the biggest part of that document are the risk factors, all the risk of why the company is going to fail, and some of which can't be helped, a pandemic, a terrorist attack, and then some risk factors, it can be somewhat controlled. If you're going to do business if you're an American business going to do business in mainland China, there's geopolitical risk. There's lack of infrastructure if you're going to other areas of sub-Saharan Africa. Every company that's listed on a US stock exchange, either NYSE or Nasdaq, has to file a 10K. And those are about 250 pages. And the biggest part of those 10Ks are the risk factors. So that's why, in the blog post I just shared is the risk factors. I guess that's the question to you, Patricia, that other pitch deck coaches and advisors I talk to within my circle still don't feel that a discussion on the risk factors is as great value to most investors. That's why there's not a lot of discussion on the risk factors. But the question to you is, how does a company address maybe their key risks going forward? Because I think founders make the mistake that they have to have the perfect cookie, the perfect cake has to be made and iced and candles on it to give it to investors. And investors don't want that. They want to know where the problems are because we want to add value. We want to add financial value. We want to help the team. So yeah, the question of the risk factors, how does that get addressed in your opinion?
How should that, or how is that? I'll say this, right? You talked about this being sales, and I completely agree. So just like when a salesperson tries to, pitches a product to me, I know that there's things that I don't know that they won't tell me about. Some of the not even disadvantages, but things to watch out for, things to consider, things like that, right? They'll only focus on the good parts. And so I fully expect that as a investor, when I look at a pitch deck, that's what I'm seeing. I know that there are things I won't know about. For example, if we talked about this earlier, that market size or the competitive landscape, or even the risks. If someone included the risks, I would totally have, look at it with a big grain of salt on it, because I know that there's something I don't know. And so with that, I think back to a statistic I saw, which is in looking at early stage startups, more than half, like 52, 53% of the consideration for investors on the startup is about the team, right? And so it really is looking at the team and seeing, do I have confidence in that team to figure it out? The connection with the team and that confidence in that team is so important, because when they show things like a competitive landscape, it have so much information there. And I think I'm not going to be an expert in any of these features, right? Or a lot of the things that they're talking about when they do a deep dive into details. I'm not going to be that expert, but I am relying on the team to understand what all of these features are, or these details, and execute and be able to problem solve, right? Just like to look at really what the risks are. I view myself in terms of, as an investor, I call myself the intelligent but ignorant audience, right? And I view a lot of my peers that way. Intelligent, being able to figure things out and think things through and make investments, but ignorant, which means literally without knowledge about the particulars of that company's field. I invest in biotech. I don't have a background in biology, but I invest in it because of other data points. And it's different for every company. And so this is why I talk about there's no formula for these are all the points that you have to hit, but it will be that combination of things that gives me confidence in that company. And so with the risks too, I think about, okay, they could tell me all the risks. Am I going to be able to validate all of them? I don't think I will. Most companies, most startups are doing something so niche that I don't think that I'm going to be the expert and be able to double check their work. So this is why, for me, a big component of that is looking at all the hidden clues in the pitch deck, in the founders and how they speak and how their actions and all of that. Just like kind of going back to the job interview, you interview someone a couple times, there's still a lot you don't know.
Great answer. Lucy Wu, you have the ability to unmute if you want to engage in the conversation, but Lucy did. There you are.
Hi, Lucy. She's a
Hi.
fellow MIT person.
Yeah, I know Patricia.
Very good. I mean, I'll let you in a moment kind of get to your question, but it is interesting. Again, the last 10 days with all the conferences, seen a lot of pitches, and there's a question of, now there's when I started my career, there was the 10-minute pitch, that I live by. Then they got expanded to 12-minute pitch because added climate risk and how does climate impact either your business or the business of your customers. So that adds another 2 minutes. But the event I attended on Tuesday that Max Shapiro organizes is a 4-minute pitch, and Zahava Stroud does one that's up to 8 minutes. So there is a question of detail and how much detail do you include? Because again, you ask 10 investors, you get 13 opinions, and half of those is that you added too much detail, and some is I would like to have known more about that. So I see that. But Lucy, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you expand on the question that you posed.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks both of you for your time. And so I'm super early in this journey of creating a company, and it's pretty crazy. Like I feel like I'm learning something new every hour. So putting together a pitch, and I think we have a lot of different areas. I mean, that we figured out, that we have plans for, but definitely there's things that we haven't figured out. And as a small team just starting out, like if we even try to put together something that's like comprehensive, like first of all, it's going to suck up a lot of time. We're going to be like hamster wheeling, and perfectionist in me is like, well, can we validate that? Are we promising something that we can't deliver? And then number two, like, is it even like believable, right? Like if I tell you like, oh, these are like, I've done like tons of work on this competitor market, but I have no customers. Like, is there things that sort of, and I guess even for companies at every stage, right, there are going to be things that are unknown, but you and me focus on different things at different stages. So how do we like present that in sort of pitch format? Like, hey, we've got these things figured out. We have a good team together. We have good partners. This is what we want to do in the next whatever period. There are things we haven't figured out, and well, maybe with your help and advice and investment, we can. Like, is that like an okay thing to do?
I think there are things you're not going to have figured out, but I think the basics you need to have figured out, or at least have an answer for how you are thinking about it. I want to say something to what Aaron talked about, the however many minute pitch, however long that is. If we really think about at the end of the day, what is a pitch, right? It's really for most companies, it's about getting funding, right? And how do you get funding? You're pitching to either VCs or angel investors. Whoever you're pitching to, you really need to, your goal is to explain your company enough that they can confidently explain it to someone else. Because I think that's the gold standard, because if you're pitching to VCs, right, they need to understand enough that they can explain it to the other partners to get buy-in on that investment. For angel investors, similar, where they need to feel really comfortable in about your company and being able to really be excited and to invest. But in order to get that, they have to really comfortably understand your company. So to me, that it's the ultimate goal. And then, so if that's the ultimate goal, then think about how much do people actually understand and track, right? You could do this really simply with friends or colleagues who don't know exactly all that you're doing. Just pitch to them or give them your presentation deck. So if you give them the presentation deck, let them read it for 3 to 5 minutes, and then take it away and then ask them, what is a problem solution business model, and would you invest, why or why not? And you'll know immediately whether they really got it or not. So in terms of the 3, 8, 10, whatever that is, I think out of all of these, there's only so much people will retain, right? Process and retain. So if you're doing a 12-minute pitch, I feel like how much more do they actually remember? My hypothesis is not that much. People really don't remember very much about what you're saying. So this is why, I think the general rule is is 3 to 5 things. So this is why when I teach about in the class, it's about the principle of the narrative and really thinking about what are the 3 to 5 things you want them to know, remember, do by the end of that presentation. This for any presentation. So what are the things you really want to hammer home? Like if I were doing a 12-minute pitch, I would really think about what are the main messages and say it a few times, right? Because that's the only way the audience will remember. In terms of, did that answer your question, Lucy, or it's not, or are there things that you have questions
Yeah.
about?
And I think like a lot of times we try to like squeeze a ton of info into a presentation, and it's like, and then people ask questions that was on there, so it's like obviously didn't work out very well.
Yeah, the thing is like, think about when you receive an email that's really long and dense. Before you even read it, you're just like so overwhelmed. It's almost like your capacity to even hear or retain information decreases because you're just so overwhelmed by so much content. And this is what happens with a pitch deck too. So it's so much better. I tell people you can include a lot of information, but most people are not reading, studying, or hearing it. And worse yet, they're disengaging because it's so overwhelming, so much information. So yeah, do you want to include all the information you think you should be including, or do you want to try to simplify it so they actually have a chance of remembering it?
Very good. Let me actually pose the next question, and we've got time check, about 7 minutes left here. But Lucy triggered a question for me. The issue of traction. Now, some investor friends of mine want to know, what have you done in the past? And traction can be defined in so many different ways. So I guess there's a question of how do you advise your clients on dealing with the issue of traction? What does traction mean to you as an investor? And how much of the storytelling, because really what I see, you, Patricia, is really in the business of storytelling. How much of the storytelling is about the future of the company? And I do get frustrated with some of my other investor friends where I think and I'm not questioning their success, they've had great success, but during the Q&A, they keep on, I think focus too much about, well, why haven't you done more? Tell me more about the last 12 months and whatnot, where to me, I'm investing for the next 5 years. I'm with, at least 3 years, but that story of 3 to 5 years. So big question on traction, but how do you advise people on to address that and kind of bridge that disparity between past performance, which may not be an indicator of future performance, in the storytelling of what could be happening in the future?
Kind of going back to the job interview analogy, right? So when recent college grads, right, their senior year, they're interviewing for jobs, and I remember I was in the same boat. I would get interview questions like, where do you see yourself in the next 5 or 10 years? And we all kind of hate that question, but the flip side is also, I mean, I haven't even started working yet. How do I know? And even people ask me now, where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years? And I say, I don't want to be limited by that, because all I know is I'm trying hard every day and I'm improving myself every day. I could not have anticipated my career change now, or even where I was even 2 years ago. So I really don't like trying to project that far into the future, especially given what stage of the company one is at. In terms of traction, one of the examples I gave earlier, a company that had like 8 million downloads of their app, not much revenue yet. They almost didn't include it, right? Because they said, oh, we're not making revenue yet. But they have 8 million downloads, right? That means something. right? So I view it as, and then people get shy about doing that. They're like so modest, as a founder, they're still so modest. I'm like, no, you got to put it all out there and make yourself known, however you can. If you don't have the best, but still like use what you've got and just try to, otherwise, you don't stand a chance, right? You're kind of discounting yourself. So in terms of traction, every company is going to be different. I think for me, when I look at investments and when I look at companies, yes, I consider a lot about the team and what they've done, how in that momentum of what they've accomplished, but it's also about is their head in the right place? Do they have that sense of logic? And this is what's so interesting when I look at the deck, right? Are they telling that narrative in a logical way? Because that means they have the ability to think logically to then solve the problem. Just like when I talk about considering the audience, why is that so important? Because if I see a company is considering the audience as they are pitching, that means they have the ability to consider the other side, which is considering the customer, which is critical for company success. You also mentioned storytelling. I think that word is very misleading because storytelling is about a count of incidents or events, and often they're not really keeping presentation goals in mind. And often people mistake that for story time, which it definitely should not be. I think it's more about the narrative, the logical sequence that you are describing your company, and it's really always keeping in mind what are the goals of that.
Yeah, I appreciate that, all your comments, particularly that clarification. So I just want to do one last plug. It is coincidental that we've got two women back to back. They don't know each other. It's just completely, from Taiwan, who now live here in the U.S. And so that'll be our next Fireside Chat next week. I guess it's really, Patricia, kind of in the last, we've got a minute left, but we'll go a little bit over here. But what are kind of three takeaways that the audience should really have? And I guess part of that is measured success, the KPIs, key performance indicators, whether it's the downloads, it's the data, it's how much money, it's the financial, profit margin. If a company can show me healthy profit margin, that gets my attention. If they're asking for $1 million and they're able to say, 30% is going to R&D, 40% is going to G&A, and 30% is going to sales and marketing, that's as well. So two questions there. KPIs, how do you incorporate that? How important is that? And as well as just three kind of key takeaways.
Yeah. So I think KPIs are important, and it's similar to market size, right? It's not just about the KPIs themselves, but it is also demonstrating how you're thinking about the KPIs and what is important to you. And so I look at all of these things. What KPIs are you including, and in what order are you including them, and how are you describing it? It's not just about the numbers. It's about demonstrating how you are thinking, because I really want to know how you think, because I am investing in essentially your experience and your skills and your ability to think about your startup. In terms of three main things, for me, it is the overall narrative, how you are describing your company in a way that investors easily and quickly understand, considering the audience, which means understanding exactly, I talked about the behaviors, actions, and deliverables, in tailoring those to understanding who the audience is. So who they are, what they know, and what drives them. And then thirdly, I would just end with just think always think about, being intentional about how you're going about this and being intentional and thoughtful about how you're doing this, because then only then can you really improve and you're not just treading water.
Thank you very much. We could go on for a long time, but this is just a snippet of you sharing your expertise and your background. Thank you, Patricia, for a very
Thank you.
enlightening and engaging conversation. Thank you to everyone who attended, and this will be on YouTube shortly. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you.